me to be able to help moderate this panel. And so as the slide says, it's the panel on faith and labor and solidarity of Filipino migrants. So we just want to make sure that yes, the human rights crisis in the Philippines is very dire, as we just learned, but that doesn't mean that we don't also care about the human rights of migrants here. So we have folks here who will be able to share, how they view solidarity to migrants, what we can do, and what's all of our role, even as we're talking about human rights in the Philippines, and of course the direct connection that has, because we know that when people can't find a livelihood back home in the Philippines, they go overseas and again are attacked by fascism. And so we want to be able to show that connection for all of you. So and so I will pass it to our first panelist.
Right there.
So our first panelist is Kai. They're from ICHRP-US, USA. And they will be speaking about what are the issues of Filipino migrants here in this country and how are they facing it.
Hi everybody, kamusta? Thank you. It's really good to be here with all of you. The Bay Area is really where my whole outlook on life was transformed through being able to really join together with other immigrants and workers that are fighting back. So like I was sharing, I'm Kai. I'm the chairperson of ICHRP-USA, and we're an alliance of 17 organizations across the country made of Filipino migrant workers that are fighting for their rights and welfare here in the US and in the Philippines. And so, I left the Philippines with my parents and my sister when I was 3 because my family thought we had a better chance making a living in the US, even without legal status. And when I think about the difficulties that my family experienced while working in this country, the worst part is that the problems that we went through are so common. But the good part is that ever since Filipinos have experienced these types of problems of exploitation and abuse, we have fought back. And this was true since the time of Spanish colonization, and it's true now in the era of Trump and Marcos Jr. colluding to attack and exploit the Filipino people. Go to the next slide. I'll go through this a little bit more briefly, but Andan Bayan USA was sharing a bit about the context of our gathering today. And the US is no longer the only superpower, and so this fascism that we see is desperation to maintain dominance. The economy is in crisis, and the rich and powerful are desperate to stay rich and to stay powerful. But then, as history has shown us, in times of crisis, the first in line to fire are migrant workers. Because the rich view migrant workers as people that are expendable, who can be scapegoated or blamed for the problems that those in power created, and who can be exploited for more profit. How? I think everybody's seeing how across the country, right? There's stripping away of rights to create a more vulnerable workforce that's easier to exploit, or by labeling us as criminals, making us targets of hate, creating a climate of fear, and they rely on us, on our people, for cheap labor, so they allow workers to enter, but only on a temporary basis. And then in attacking immigrants, migrants, even in their attacks, making money from them. So by detaining them in inhumane conditions and making massive money for corporations through detention and through prison labor. And so all of this is so that the rich stay rich and the US can maintain its dominance, currently represented by Trump and his friends. But if you go to the next slide, the US doesn't do it on its own. Trump has the active support of Marcos Jr. And it's not just neglect, it's straight up betrayal. And so the quote that's listed here after he met with Trump in July earlier this year, despite the thousands of people that are suffering under the attacks of the Trump regime showing no leadership to speak up for migrant workers. And so in the press conference after, when he was asked, well, did the topic of immigration come up? He said that it wasn't raised, and basically parroted the same things that the same lies that Trump is saying, that the people being attacked are criminals. And that's the situation. That's all that he had to say. And so no leadership, no standing up to fight back and to assert for the protections of Filipino migrant workers here. So he's, why? He's doing this why? Anand shared a bit earlier. It's to secure the support of the US, politically and militarily. And it's not new. Every Philippine president before him has relied on US support to maintain power and to continue amassing their wealth. Under Marcos Jr., it's to the tune of billions of dollars in military aid, weapons, other investments, and the promise of political support. Meanwhile, if we go to the next slide, right now in the Philippines, millions of Filipinos are being displaced from their homes as floods fill their streets and spill into their homes. And this is just one example of how Marcos Jr. and the governments of the Philippines are stealing from the people to fatten their own pockets, and it's at the expense of Filipino lives. Because this headline, it's noting these Nepo babies in the Philippines, that's referring to this widespread anger towards the children of contractors that get awarded flood projects, that live in luxury, talking about like dozens of cars, just so much being spent on food, on clothing, on these meaningless things. How does that connect? It's that there's billions of dollars that Marcos Jr. approved in the budget, that these, as Andan was shared earlier, bureaucrat capitalists, billions of dollars that are being put towards these flood control projects, but then in reality, those projects are not completed. They're not even completed at all, or they're done not up to the standards that they're supposed to. And it's estimated that up to 60% of a project's value is actually pocketed by government officials at these different levels that they share with their colleagues. And as a result, the people waist deep in dirty and diseased flood water. And they're going out searching for their loved ones, and some, like a recent report, a recent high school graduate, 4 days looking for his dad, and then he died from it, searching in these dirty floodwaters. That's the neglect of the government, and this is just one example of the corruption that creates the conditions that force Filipinos to work abroad. Instead of the Philippine government working to help Filipinos, they're making money off of them. And it's since the time of Marcos Sr. that they've made a business of sending people abroad. And so an example of just one recent trafficking campaign. For example, in Southern California, each of those workers before they left paid thousands of dollars in fees, US dollars in fees, to different government agencies, other types of expenses, times at least 8,000 Filipinos that are leaving the country every day. It's a cash cow. They're making money off of the migration of the Filipino people. It's actually more than 1 in 10 Filipinos that are living and working outside of the country. So it's not a small thing, it's an epidemic. It's been systematized in 2022, was systematized into the DMW. But again, this was created since the time of Marcos Sr. And then they assigned personnel supposed to be responsible for migrant workers once they're overseas. But even they do not do their job. So that was in the bottom corner, the recall of the labor attaché, one of 2, based in the US, that was recalled back to the Philippines because of her ties as a president of one of the controversial flood projects. This is who's assigned to these posts. And many of the Migrante members, I know that are here, have experience at feeling neglected, not listened to and heard. She had the audacity to our faces to tell us that bringing worker concerns to her was a form of harassment. And so the main point is that the Philippine government isn't doing their job. Officials are misusing funds and workers are being neglected. And under this current system, Filipinos have 2 choices: accept the conditions at home or go abroad for work. But the truth is, through their resistance, migrant workers are showing there's actually a 3rd choice, and that choice is to fight to change the conditions. In Migrante USA, these members that are leading this fight are right here today. Such a close friend and lucky of the current Marcos Jr., so inspiring leaders that, are really fighting back in fast food. Since last year, Jollibee workers have been fighting for holiday pay, and after continuous fights in the stores across the country, the Jollibee Corporation conceded certain holiday pay earlier this year. There's seafarers like the United Six. I know there's folks here that were part of that fight for the United Six. Fishermen that were stranded in Washington Dock after months of fishing, and they were fighting to really persecute the ones responsible in the Philippines and in the U.S. and have become a voice for seafarers, offering their solidarity to cruise ship workers. There's caregiver leaders like Shea and so many others asserting their labor rights, their right to work, demanding dignified working conditions, despite the many attacks coming at migrant workers, really showing and fighting to assert their right to work and for dignified pay and conditions. And the campaigns really resulted in the strengthening and building of many migrante chapters across the country, convening a successful General Assembly last May. And immediately after the election, we began waging the Tanto Migrante campaign with Bayan USA, with so many other organizations, NAFCON, so many other organizations. And we were able to launch the Tanto Migrante movement on July 29 with over 50 members across the country. The Defend Migrants Alliance with over 100 members this past month. So if we go to the next slide, I'll talk about this very briefly because look at this brother in the middle. So, we have such an esteemed panel, so you'll get to hear a little bit more directly from Kuya Max, but really the Tanto Migrante movement has forced the representatives of Marcos Jr. in the U.S. to at least pretend that they're doing more for migrant workers here. Because we know that they're not, and we know that it's criminal neglect, but they're trying to now pretend that they are. Whenever they do a visit to someone detained, they make a big social media post about it. They do all of these things, folks touched on it earlier. But there's this consistent, united voice to raise the concerns of workers and come together in key moments to pressure the Philippine government, and it's resulted in these victories. Different detained Filipinos being released. These are fights that we took up in partnership with labor unions, pushing for the swift release of others detained. Some of those that have gone back home, like Legaya, still fighting from the Philippines, got involved there, fighting to continue to organize, and ongoing fights active to expose the gross medical neglect that people are experiencing and really demand for this to be addressed, for comprehensive services to be provided to folks as soon as they get back to the Philippines. But it's through the determination and the sheer pressure from this movement that there's these victories. And the victories, they show that there's cracks in the system and it's not permanent. It can be challenged, it can be changed, and the more we fight back, the truth is, the more we fight back, the more we see how deep the rot goes. The rot in the system goes, but because we fought, we also know the truth that through our fight, we can win. And what is it that we want to win? What is it that we're fighting for? It's a change to the system. And so a society where, if you go to the next slide, many people are actually flooding the streets, also demanding a change to the system. But a society where 1 in 10 people do not have to be separated from their children, their loved ones, their home country just in order to survive. But because the people, a society where they can have a dignified and happy life on the beautiful lush islands of the Philippines, isn't that what we're fighting for? ICHRP, if we go to the next slide. ICHRP! It wasn't about just sandwiches, it was about organization includes Filipinos all over the globe, because of the current system. And so what can ICHRP do to uplift the struggles of Filipino workers, not just in the Philippines, but around the world and right here in the US? And not just those detained and caged up behind bars, but all workers that are also bearing the weight of shackles from exploitation, from trafficking, and workplace abuse. And so the partnership and solidarity with labor unions and faith, we'll get to hear from some of those leaders right now, has been so critical in contributing to the victories of migrant worker fights. Faith leaders secured sanctuary for the United Six while they were pursuing justice. Labor unions called for mass protest and linked arms to free Auntie Lynn, Kuya Max, called for the release of unjustly detained migrants. And so let's stand together with the people. Let's shine a light onto government corruption and the cracks in the system that we need to break wide open, so the light of liberation and of the new society that we want to build can shine through.
Our next speaker is Mary Ballin. Mary Ballin is a coordinating committee member of the International Migrants Alliance and an international coordinating body member of IMA globally. IMA is the first ever global alliance of, for, and led by organizations of grassroots migrants, refugees, and displaced peoples. IMA is an anti-imperialist alliance that aims to strengthen and put forward the voices of grassroots migrants on issues affecting them and their families, with over 200 organization members from over 33 countries worldwide. All right, let's give it up for Terry.
We'll go through these slides in a little bit, but I'm just going to say a little bit and kind of broaden out a little bit of what Kai said, very specific on the Philippines and the Filipino people's struggle and migrant struggle. But like Lau said, I'm with the International Migrants Alliance. Very proud to be here with you all, sitting at this table with folks I've been fighting with for decades now, some of these folks at the table. And recently did a day with Kuya Max and Ate Crystal. So we're going to continue this fight moving forward, and it's good to be in another gathering of powerful folks that are building the power we need to fight back. So I won't say more about IMA, but we're actually closer to now to 250 organizations in 35 different countries around the world. It's grassroots migrants and their organizations that lead to IMA, but it includes faith-based labor, research institutions, NGOs, formations like churches witnessing with migrants. And there's now migrant worker unions that are part of IMA too, in countries like Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Aotearoa, and Senegal. So workers, faith communities, but led by grassroots migrants all over the world. And looking around this room, there's migrants from all over the world here in the Bay Area and across the United States. And we're all fighting and suffering from the same attacks, but fighting that good fight together. So let's continue to build that. I'm also here representing what Kai talked about. We just launched the Defend Migrants Alliance. Who was there for the launch of the Defend Migrants Alliance? We had their assembly at the end of July. We launched the Defend Migrants Alliance at the end of August in Portland and at the Tacoma, Washington Northwest Detention Center. And so IMA, together with the Bango Migrante movement, what we did was brought our fights together, brought close to 100 organizations together and said, we need to fight together now and build this united alliance. Fighting back against ICE raids, detentions, deportations, government neglect and abuse, workplace exploitation and violence, all in the political context of this fascist attack to the Trump administration. The theme was build strength and hope, resist fascist attacks, exploitation and oppression, and end forced migration. It's not just from the Philippines, but it's from so many other countries around the world. So we brought together 500 participants. We had the conference in over 5 different languages, and we had 1,000 people coming together throughout the weekend, including at the Northwest Detention Center, over 850 people there. But it included solidarity message videos from places like Indonesia, Malaysia, Senegal, Chile, Ecuador, Italy, Canada, and Hong Kong. So the International Migrants Alliance building the power internationally because the struggle is international. Well, we have to wage this fight here in the United States. I want say too much about like folks know kind of the situation here, but I want to say pull a little bit of the excerpts that our chairperson of IMA, Annie Lestari, she was a former Indonesian domestic worker in Hong Kong. She had a powerful keynote speech, so I just want to highlight some of the things that she brought to the table from an international perspective of what we're facing here. So since the inception of the neoliberal projects in the 1970s, the forced migration of peasants and workers from underdeveloped countries has continuously increased. The plunder of resources from our homelands to feed the industries of more developed capitalist countries is coupled with the developed economies needing a vast army of cheap, skilled but docile labor. Economic displacement, unemployment and underemployment, landlessness and lack of social services, especially education and health, force millions to migrate to leave their families, their communities and their homelands. So not just from the Philippines, but guess how many forced migrants there are around the world? It's about 280 million right now. And then millions more are displaced by wars instigated by powerful countries, chiefly the United States. And with now more than 100 million refugees displaced by imperialist wars and conflict, we add that together, that's like 380 million displaced forced migrants and refugees. That's more than the entire population of the United States. Imagine, forced abroad and can't live in our homelands. Even militarism in rural areas by fascist governments to suppress dissent and revolutionary movements results in displacement from the countryside to the urban areas, the Philippines and other countries. But the urban centers of colonies and semi-colonies can never absorb the displaced people, and many are forced to seek overseas employment. So the situation in the United States is a reflection that global exploitation and repression faced by migrants across the world. Migrants are also scapegoated and anti-migrant narratives have intensified, particularly with the rise of right-wing governments in migrant-receiving countries, not just in the US, but places like the UK, Germany, Japan, Hong Kong, and Canada. So this Trump phenomenon is not just here in the US, but it's in other receiving countries as well. What happens in the US is not an exception, but part of a broader international system that thrives on migrant labor while denying migrants their dignity, rights, and voices. Repression has become common through waves of crackdown, arrest, detention, and deportation, just like what we're seeing here. Practices that intensified under the Trump regime and that weaponize xenophobia and the state machinery to scapegoat migrants for the crises of US capitalism. In the first half of 2025 alone, the government has deported about 70 to 80,000 migrants already, causing thousands of children to lose their parents, and denied tens of thousands of asylum seekers already from their applications. More are being arrested and deported, even to third unsafe countries like El Salvador, South Sudan, Libya, and elsewhere. Under the Trump regime, fascism is a tool for the ruling class, the elite, the rich, to perpetuate their economic, political, and social dominance. They utilize the full coercive apparatus of the state, including this Department of Homeland Security, ICE and CBP, to silence protests, crush dissent, and discredit agents for revolutionary change. But we've been fighting this fight before Trump came, right? In the US, migrant workers are concentrated in many industries, including construction, farm workers, restaurants, hotels, and other hospitality and service industries. In the Filipino community, we've been organizing against the exploitation of J1 workers who've been working in hotels, restaurants, Disneyland and other places. Told they're coming here for cultural exchange and education, but they're working like cooks, housekeepers, frontline workers, and exploited. H2A farm workers as well, just like a Bracero program, are being exploited and abused at their workplaces. Most recently, IMA has been working even under the Biden administration. When, remember Governor Greg Abbott was sending migrants from Texas, he was busing them to places like Portland, Seattle, Chicago, and New York, to blue states and sanctuary cities, saying, y'all take care of them. So they had no housing, they had no livelihood. They were seeking asylum and they couldn't work because they didn't have work permits. And so they were taken in by churches in the faith community that took them in. They had no livelihood, they didn't have housing or health care. And we're working with many of these families since the end of 2023. There was one family, the family of Jose. He came here with his family to get health care for his nephew who needed important medical attention. But Jose, who had a learning disability, was not able to answer the questions that ICE was asking him. So he was detained, forced out of the country, came back and put him in the prison system. And he was talking about how he was treated like a dog. They put his food on the floor, they had eat from the ground. And Jose was one of those ones, after he was detained in Texas, he was one of those 100 that were sent to Guantanamo Bay. Remember that? He's a Venezuelan migrant sent to Guantanamo Bay. And he faced torture daily in Guantanamo Bay. He said they beat him every day. They beat him and they ripped off his toenail. He documented that, shared that with us, and then they sent him back to Venezuela where he's forced to migrate. You cannot live in Venezuela, and then so he left to other parts of South America. So Emo continued to support him and his family as he traveled throughout South America to try to find his sanctuary, livelihood, life, while his family is still in the United States, kind of applying for asylum. We continue to support his family there. Emo Washington colleagues and communities there, and his family are continuing to fight. Jose is continuing to fight. So transform our kingdom from free Jose to justice for Jose. Say justice for Jose. We also worked in the Washington area with Lilo. He's a 14-year-old farm worker. He got involved with the Farm Worker Independent Union that organized 500 farm workers since he was 14 years old. Familias Unidas por la Justicia, and community to community. His window was smashed on the road. They dragged him out of his car. They detained him at the Northwest Detention Center. He detained there for several months, and he just couldn't take it anymore. He decided to self-depart and go back to Mexico, but he's going to continue that fight from Mexico to make sure that no other farm workers, no other migrants suffered what he suffered. He's going to continue to go there, and our communities will continue to fight with him. Jorge, a day labor organizer from Portland, Oregon, same thing, suffered in the Northwest Detention Center. We're going to support him and those day labor organizers in Oregon, who he also chose to self-depart, but he's going to continue to fight. Just like Atenagaya, who was detained in Adelanto, sent to Eloy, Arizona, and sent back to the Philippines, but she's going to continue to fight for the Philippines. From the Philippines to Mexico to Venezuela and throughout South America, these folks are still continuing to fight for our homelands, because just like Kai said, we've been forced to leave our homelands because there is no livelihood there. Folks that are being deported have to continue to go abroad, so we have to continue to fight and wage this international fight all the way back to our homelands until we stop this deportation, stop the attacks on our communities, and also liberate our homelands so we can also develop them into the homelands that we need.